To the cloud. Okay, so here we go. And we're going to do, here's our talk for tonight.
You didn't fix my chair.
I'm going to fix it right now.
Okay, I can see it.
Here we go. Okay, you see this, Bruce?
Yep.
Great. So we're going to go look at the beginnings of the universe that we live in and so forth, and we'll see where that takes us. So we're going to draw on the Jewish notion of how things started, which is captured in this term of Tzimtzum. We're going to talk about inflation, which is what this classmate of mine came up with in the late 70s. We'll go into what that is. And we've got the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, where every instant we split into a different timeline every time there's a possibility of changing something, and how that plays out. And then finally, we have the mystic side of Judaism, the Kabbalah. So all of these things are going to lead into what we're talking about tonight. So it's a potpourri of different things. So here we go. Let's see. Here's our outline. Try and start off with something. So we picked the King James Bible and what it says about the beginning of the universe, just to set the stage. And then we're going to talk about how the observations of stars over the millennia led to a variety of consequences. And then we're going to go back to this thing we called inflation, and the fact that there's probably multiple universes. So it's called the multiverse. We're just in one of these. Then we're going to deal with the Tzimtzum and the Kabbalah. And just to be complete, since the Tzimtzum and Kabbalah are Judaic notions, we're going to talk about other creation myths, all of which people make fun of, but we're going to make fun of what is the current accepted wisdom. When we get done, we're going to argue that the current accepted Western science view of how everything started is going to be viewed just as crazy as what the Incas did. And then we're going to talk about some of the geometry that underlies this. So that's where we're going. So here we go. What did the Bible say? Well, in Genesis book 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So that's pretty unambiguous. There you go. Done. But then we go to the Gospel of John in the New Testament, which states that in the beginning, the Word, or Logos, existed, who was both with God and was God. And through this Word, Logos, all things were created, nothing was made without him. The Word is the source of all life and light for humanity, representing the divine power behind creation. Or, in other words, the Word is the active agent through whom God created everything. So the text of John states, all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. So we have two very different things just to start with in the Bible over how it all started. And I would argue that probably John is a little better than what Genesis has to say. But Genesis is correct. In the beginning, the heavens and earth were created. We're not disputing that. But the mysticism, the mystic side of it is what John goes into. So let's go back and look at the stars, because that's where all of the stuff comes from. So for thousands of years, people have been looking up at the stars in the sky at night. And you look at the stars, they seem to be pretty much uniformly spread across the heavens. There doesn't seem to be like a clustering of stars here and a big black void over there. They seem to be pretty much uniform. And if you get away from the city lights, you can see the Milky Way, which appears to be a kind of a milky band that runs through the sky. If you're really good, you can pick out the wanderers, the stars that are moving, but they're not stars, they're actually planets in our solar system. And then the hardest one is the precession of the poles. The pole of the Earth moves over 25,000 plus years. And so every 2,500 years or so, we have a different North Star. And that's means that you have to look at things for decades to start to pick up that that's going on. The other ones you can pick up much sooner.
And that's what Shakespeare meant when he talked about the constancy of the North Star.
Right.
It's not constant.
It's not constant. That was Shakespeare's in joke. So what happened? We all of this was done with just people using their eyeballs and looking up in the skies. And we started to have some technology, some telescopes initially with some lenses, and then the alignment of the lenses and how the lenses are shaped got better and better over time. So we had Galileo in 1609, 1610, took a telescope and actually saw craters on the moon, and he saw moons of Jupiter. There are four major moons of Jupiter that are gigantic. He was able to see them. So right away, you see things that you just couldn't have seen otherwise. In 1894, there was an observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, right by the Grand Canyon, and Percival Lowell was there, and he put out a press release saying he saw Cinelli on Mars. Well, Cinelli is Italian for channels, and the press took that to mean canals, which he never said. But anyway, that's what he did. So you could see that something was going on Mars that no one had seen before. Now, at the same observatory, Besto Slifer, I love that name. It's just an amazing name. In 1912, saw these little distant smudges of lights, and he determined they were really galaxies that were made up of millions of stars. And furthermore, these galaxies were all moving away from one another, which was like unbelievable. Why are they all moving away from one another? And Edwin Hubble picked up on this in 1923. There was a 100-inch telescope just outside of Los Angeles that he used, and he was able to show not only were the galaxies moving away from one another, but he was able to estimate how fast they were moving away from one another. And so if they're moving away from one another, that immediately suggests they probably all started off in the same place. There was some origin of all this, which is a consequence of having these telescopes. George Zwicky in 1933 estimated, he looked at these spiral galaxies and he made some assumptions that there was, say, 100 million stars in a galaxy, and they each had the mass of the sun, and each of the stars attracted one another by gravitation. And he was able to show that if that was the case, and these galaxies are spirals, they're spinning, then they'd fly apart. Unless there was additional matter which couldn't be seen, which he called dunkle matter. Dunkle is German for dark. And this was confirmed in the 1970s by Vera Rubin with a whole variety of actual measurements of this, of the rate at which these galaxies were spinning around. And her measurements clearly showed that there was probably over 5 times as much dark matter as there is matter out there, which is really disturbing. You start to wonder, where is it? So out of all these observations, we determined probably, I'd say the 1970s are kind of the latest. And so it's been this way for 50 years that our universe consisted of 5% of matter and 95% dark. Now, the dark had one component, which is 27% dark matter, and the other piece, 68%, is dark energy. But it's dark. No one knows what's going on there. So 500 years of study by science, we've studied 5% of the universe. So some have argued that the missing dark matter and energy is in other dimensions. So if we have 5% or 1/20th of everything in 3 dimensions, meaning that mass and energy are equivalent to one another, then all of the universe is in 60 dimensions, which is 3 divided by 1/20th. And what Ron Cowan observed was we actually have 12 spatial dimensions. They're complex. And so 12 and 60 either number is much greater than 3. So it's quite plausible that all of this extra dark matter and energy is in these other dimensions that we haven't seen. So let's follow this through. The result of all this stuff coming, if all the galaxies are moving away from one another, led to a lot of work I attended when I was in graduate school a talk by Steven Weinberg, who got the Nobel Prize in Physics, and he wrote a book about how the start of the universe, he called it the first 3 minutes. So the first 3 minutes in the universe had some truly mind-boggling physics that occurred there because it created conditions that you could never duplicate in any laboratory other than to start up another universe. So this start was called the Big Bang because everything seemed to explode out of that. And therefore, if it was exploding, it was assumed that there was an expansion of a really hot an initial state of the universe, maybe 13.8 billion years ago. And then it gradually cooled down into what we see today. And so the evidence that this is correct includes that all the galaxies are going away from us. Their spectra is shifted toward the red side of where their spectrum ought to be, which is an indication of going away. The cosmic background, microwave background radiation, which is the leftover glow from the bang, has been detected, which we'll see in a second. And then there's the observed abundance of light elements like hydrogen and helium, which you would get if you had an explosion. And so this theory helped explain how everything coalesced to form stars, galaxies, and these large scale structures. Okay, so that's what the conventional current cosmology is. So now here's the spoiler. There's a new telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope, that's actually in orbit around the moon, but it's on the back side of the moon. We don't see it. And so the moon is sheltering the telescope from all the electromagnetic noise coming from Earth. And this telescope has been at it now since 2021, 2022. So a few years, and it's discovered that there's real problems with the story that I just said. Furthermore, to start with, there's a whole bunch of galaxies that are there that would have formed literally millions of years right after the bang occurred. But it would take millions of years just to form one or two or 10 stars, not galaxies of stars, which are hundreds of millions of stars. And then on top of that, there's all kinds of supermassive black holes. Well, the black holes would have formed if the stars went nova, blew up, and what was left turned into a black hole. But there already were a lot of black holes, so there already were a lot of stars there. And so what we think of as the Big Bang start started to show some real problems. not matching what's going on. And having said that, we'll give you what we think is a way to solve this, but people won't like it. So let's go back and dig into this a little more. So if all the galaxies are moving away from one another, they all started out together. And one of the first real indications of this was when Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson had a radio telescope. It actually was an antenna that was used to communicate with a communications satellite called Telstar that AT&T put into orbit in 1962. And so, having said that, they had this antenna or this radio telescope, and they decided to use this to look out into space and carry out research. And in doing this, they discovered there was just a uniform hiss, uniform background noise or radiation that they couldn't get rid of, no matter what they could do. And that included them crawling into this thing and removing pigeon shit. And the pigeons, of course, left. And after they cleaned everything out, the hiss was still there. So it wasn't due to the pigeons. So they didn't know what to do. And they went over to Princeton, and there was a physicist there at Princeton, Robert Dicke. And Dicke had proposed this theory that there was a bang that started off the universe, and there would be a remnant, a background radiation remnant of this explosion. And Penzias and Wilson had these measurements that showed that within experimental observation, they matched what Dicke was saying. So they published these papers back to back in a physics journal. Penzias and Wilson just described their measurements, and they concluded their article by saying, by the way, there's a possibility that a theory can explain this. So they never said that they agreed with it. Okay. And the next paper was by Dicke, and Dicke pointed to their paper and said, here's some data that backs up, what I'm saying about this bang occurring. So for this work, they both got a Nobel Prize. And then time passes. We go to 30 years later, and a new satellite is launched. It's an even better telescope because it's out of the Earth's atmosphere. It doesn't have any crud, any electromagnetic noise from all the stuff on Earth. It's called the Cosmic Background Explorer. And it actually looked all around and discovered that, yes, what Penzias and Wilson had measured was really what would be in physics terms called a black body. A black body means it's black, but it radiates heat at a certain temperature, and the temperature was 3 degrees Kelvin. So it's almost absolute zero. Zero Kelvin is absolute zero. So it's pretty cold, but it's not zero. And the Cosmic Background Explorer showed that even though this was pretty much uniform wherever they looked, there were little speckles here and there. It wasn't completely uniform. There were some things that were different. So that led to two more satellites that are shown here. One got much higher resolution and sensitivity and improved the calculations such that they could estimate that this bang occurred 13.7 billion years ago. And the other one that I didn't put in here is complemented that. But the one that's on the backside of the moon is the James Webb Space Telescope. And it was really designed to go and look in the infrared region of the spectrum. So this is not visible. It's infrared. And it's an amazing gizmo. You should look at some of the videos on this. This thing is just unbelievable how they ever did this. And so they were able to carry out these investigations. Really, you want to observe when these stars are forming and when the galaxies are forming and so forth. And in particular, this would allow you to find planets around other stars and even finding quote unquote habitable planets, exoplanets around other stars. So that's what this thing is doing 24/7. Now, as if that wasn't good enough, there's a totally different sort of telescope called the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, or LIGO. So it uses lasers, and it ends up here's the center here. It shoots this thing down a few kilometers this way and that way, and there's mirrors there that bounce things back and forth. And the end result of this is by going over these long distances and using lasers, which are tuned to really one particular frequency, very pure frequency, they can observe uh, with mirrors that are 4 kilometers apart. 4 kilometers is 2.5 miles. That they're able to measure changes in lengths of less than 1/10,000th the diameter of the proton, which is pretty good experimental work. And when they did this, they discovered gravity waves. This was the first. This came about 10 years ago using these things. So great, we've got all these data now. How in the world do we put it together? So here's an attempt at theory, which is called cosmic inflation. The basic problem you have is when you look at the stars in the sky, they're uniformly spread out as if there was a bang or explosion. If that was the case, then you would expect that the stars would be clumped. Explosions lead to some things being clumped together and other things being far apart from one another. That's the nature of explosions. So if there really wasn't an explosion or a bang, how come everything is so uniform? There's got to be some way that this happened. And then the other problem you have is that apparently wherever we look in the universe, we see the same background temperature, this 3 degree Kelvin, wherever we look. So why is everything all at the same temperature? Shouldn't there be some places that are hotter than others and some that are cooler than others? So in 1979, this classmate of mine, Alan Guth, proposed that the universe expanded very rapidly at the start, maybe 30 orders of magnitude. And so when you get a change like this, you could think of it like a phase change in water, where things change from solid to liquid or liquid to gas. It's an incredible change, and it leads to very different behavior. So he simply postulated there was some sort of special energy field that inflated everything exponentially, and then it quit. Okay, one of the problems Alan Guth had with his theory was he proposed that this would start things off. He couldn't figure out why it would stop, and there were a couple of other people that immediately came up with why it would stop. So that fixed that. And here's a little picture here that shows this is uh, our time, 13.7 billion years here. And here at the start, here's what we're talking about, this inflation taking place so that the universe expanded from something very, very small, something 30 orders of magnitude bigger. And then it's slowly been expanding ever since then. That's what we see here. So this the problem with this is that Guth proposed that a piece of this thing would expand and then stop. Well, what if that was not everything that was there? What if only a piece of what was there expanded and then stopped, and that when it stopped, it created our universe, and then the other pieces were still expanding. So these other pieces would also break off or stop. They would form other universes, and there would be trillions upon trillions of universes out there, each of them in their own little bubble, and they're disconnected. Each universe is in a region of quote unquote space. What does it mean to have space in between universes? That's left to your imagination. but the expansion of all this stuff outpaced its decay. So it means that some areas decayed and formed universe, but the majority continued to inflate and expand and so forth. And so the question is, what's really going on here? And Ron Cowan in 2018 went in deep meditation and he observed that the space compartments expanded very, very rapidly. That was indeed correct. But there was no bang, there was no explosion, there was no nuclear fireball, there was only a bounce that occurred. And one thing you learn in physics is one good observation kills 1,000 theories. So Ron just wiped out a lot of things by that observation. So we have this multiverse. So here's each of these little bubbles is a universe, and and whatever's in between them, you could call it meta space. I don't know, whatever it is. But here's all these universes, and they're bubbling around and so forth. They could even have different physical constants and different laws of physics, and they could have their own timelines. And there could be, again, our universe, it's estimated, has 100 billion galaxies, and each of the galaxies has 100 billion stars. So you figure out what's going on here. This is pretty mind-boggling. So now we go to Marjorie. We're going to try and look back in a totally different way in the mystics as to how in the world did this come about, and we're going to turn to the Jews, to the Kabbalah, uh, which has got two different spellings, one in Hebrew and one in a Western esoteric tradition. It's all yours.
Well, some people postulate that the description of what's called the Tzimtzum in Hebrew is a description of the Big Bang in Genesis, and that's what they were describing. And I would say it was something along those lines, but not necessarily exactly that. And the way it's described in scriptural terms is it's the universe creating itself out of nothing. So the terms, the universe with a capital U and God and so on can be interchangeable. It's so you're not really understanding it if you think it's just one or the other. And that the Tzimtzum is dividing this split or division. Do you want to get to an image of that?
Let's see. I have this picture here.
Yeah. And so just in general terms, it's the beginning of the Or Sof, which means the endless. That's just what it means, the infinite or the infinite light. Divided itself from itself to create this illusion of duality. And that everything that occurs in this reality is as a result of that division of the unity from itself. Because if that's all there is, that's everything. That's the totality of everything that ever has happened or is happening or will happen or can possibly happen in the future. That's the totality. You can't talk about it beyond that. You can just go like, and that's it. That constant om, sound, which is said to have created the universe, is everything. There's no experience. There's no light. There's no dark. There's just this big blob, of mayonnaise in this jar that is everything. So in order to have any particularization, you need to have this division of the unity from itself. So this is depicted in terms of God withdrew itself from the totality by kind of sucking itself in and creating a vacated space. They call it the vacant space. I think of it as the vacated space, which was the divine withdrew itself from part of this totality in order to have the illusion of creation from the totality. It had to remove itself from that oneness to some extent to have a vacated space to dump itself into in this process of creation. And the understanding of this is that that's really all there is this ongoing process of creation. It's not something that happened once in a certain date, in a certain year, a certain number of years ago. It's constantly unfolding. But in order to talk about it as human beings, we're using this kind of artificial language and we're talking about it as something that happened originally a long time ago as creation, capital C, creation. But the real understanding is that it's not something that happened and ended, it's something that is continually happening. And that the universe, the infinite creation, is unfolding itself out of itself. And it's just ongoing. The Hindus describe it almost like breathing, that there's an expansion, an exhalation, and then a contraction and an inhalation. And it can take, any of various different numbers of years, that it's a cycle. But it's a cycle of expansion and contraction. And they have a term for it. But it's really about this Aaron Soft, the endless, dividing itself into something finite so that you can have existence. Existence isn't even possible. If everything is all one, there's no existence because there's no non-existence or unexistence, if that makes sense.
Just to complement this, prior to the observations by Penzias and Wilson, 1960, there was a lot of discussion by physicists, by cosmologists, and one of them, Fred Hoyle, a Brit, argued that he had a mechanism for continually creating matter, and in the course of doing this, he would continually have space itself expand. And when Penzias and Wilson came up with their observations, immediately everyone jumped on this and poo-pooed what Fred Hoyle did. But I think it would be worthwhile to go back and look at what Fred Hoyle said, because there's probably a lot of truth in it. It mirrors very much what Marjorie just said in its own way. So let's let Marjorie proceed.
In Kabbalah, I hope people are reading this. I'm not going to just read it out loud. I'm saying something complementary to it from my background. This is something that Bart found and is sharing with us. So the Hebrew word tzimtzum can mean contraction, retraction. That's a concept I like. It retracted itself from the units, the unity, demarcation, restraint, and concentration. So I perceive it as a kind of withholding of itself from the infinite, so that there was something finite, it was at least a finite space into which the infinite could deposit a part of itself. So, and the purpose of this was for the infinite to know itself. So it had to have some place, or dimension where it could withdraw some of itself or withhold some of itself so that it could know the rest of itself. It's a kind of conundrum to even talk about it. So the term Simsum originates in the Kabbalah and refers to God's contraction of himself or itself before the creation of the world and for the purpose of creating the world. So it's this kind of, inhale to pull back and then exhale to blow its sacred breath into this. I kind of picture it almost like an alembic, that the alchemists use, that the divine then blew itself into, just so you could have some kind of interplay and some kind of conceptualization of this. Otherwise, it's just this infinity where you can't even
It,
say anything.
it has no mirror, and it has no way to
No, it's not.
evolve or grow or change or learn about itself. So it's saying, why don't I do this? And I'll probably learn a lot more.
And you could say, I've had meditations that were actually kind of hellish experiences of unity because there's nothing to do, there's nothing to know, there's nobody to know it, there's nothing to say, and it's just endless nothingness, and it can be horrible in my view, and that's what God, the consciousness of the universe, personifying that, to say that it wanted to experience itself and realize that it needed the phenomenon of limitation in order to do that. When everything is infinite oneness, there are no limitations. So there's nobody to do the knowing of the known. It's just all there. And I think that is probably the reality of how it actually is. But this entity or wanted the experience of existence. So it created this phenomenon of emanation. And that's really how the tree of life is seen, as these 10 emanations from the infinite beyond, which is the Ein Sof. So the Kabbalah is really always kind of breaking down this endless infinity.
Yeah, we saw something, conceptually similar to this in the book of Job, with God trying to sort out, if God is all knowing, then how can you deal with evil as well as good? And that was covered there. So we also have this Isaac Luria. Do you want to explain who he is?
Um, he's considered to be one of the founding fathers of what we could say is modern Kabbalah, which came out of medieval times. And it was much older than that, and it was not written down. That's when it started to be written down and become more codified and diagrammatic, because in the Hebrew tradition, there's a real aversion to, I would say, words and images, because it's sacrilegious. It's a sacrilege to limit it and define it and describe it, and particularly to depict it. So you would never try to have a picture of God, and it certainly wouldn't be a man on a throne on a cloud. It's the infinite unity. It's the oneness. You can't even talk about it. But in order to try to experience it and express it, maybe understand it in some way, they do try to do that. They try to diagram it. They try to um, quantify it. So the symptom is the beginning of this. Here they're calling it vacant space. It's an interplay. It's a game that the divine is playing with itself in order to experience itself and experience growth and evolution. But you're talking about it in an artificial way because you know this isn't really what happened or what happens.
This is where words are metaphors, and they're just terrible because you're dealing with concepts that words can't really describe or images can't really describe. It's a starting point, but you have to really, I think, experience this in order to come to grips with what it is, and that's where we're at right now.
So the orange and soft is the endless, endless. And then you're breaking things down from there, knowing that that's a convention. It's not what really happens, but it's a way of describing the creation of the universe is a process really of division and separation, and you're subtracting from that overall oneness into particularity so that you have an instance of something. Otherwise, you just have this infinite everything, which is also infinite nothing. So, in order to have any phenomenon at all, you have to have this principle of containment and limitation. So, it's said that God created the vessels in the empty space of the Simpson, the vacated space, created vessels into which to deposit the
Hands off.
the Ensof, the endless, endless. The light goes into these vessels in order to hold the power of the light, but it was too much. So the vessels that were limited shattered. And that shattering created these shards of light, is what they're called. And they're really what we see as reality. They're the shattering, splinters of that first creation. And then the next step, I think this is beautiful, is for human beings. It's our job to restore that broken universe that shattered. And that was because there was too much power going through. That vessel was too fragile and too limited. So our job is, with our love and our devotion, to gather the shards and raise them back up. And this is part of our job on the Sabbath, is to revivify that broken universe. And this is of the shards of the shattered vessels. This is our primary job as human beings. This is our duty. And it's really about restoring the sacred and taking the everyday and raising it to its proper place of sacredness. And that's the purpose of the Sabbath, is to reflect on this shattering and do our best to unify or reunify the unity that we know it ultimately is, but right now it's broken. And that's why they light 2 candles on the Sabbath eve and not just one. It's because you're addressing the fact that you know that as it exists now in its broken state, it's 2 and not 1. But without that duality, there's no reflection, there's no experience, there's no consciousness. So we need that illusion of that duality in order to do the work of repairing. And that's really the human task, is repairing the shattered vessels from the first creation. And that's partly a way of addressing the paradox. I think that's what breaks down is the paradox between the parts and the whole. So I think that this is a really profound effort at expressing the mystery of the cosmic, you know, circumstance that we find ourselves in, of unity and shattering, and um, you want to repair that unity without returning, just to being uh, a fetus in the womb. So birth is an experience of uh, exile. We're expelled from that amniotic unity of the first unity. And then the idea is to return to that, not in the infantile way of being in the womb of la la la, everything's one, but with having experienced the exile and the tragedy and the brokenness, but with your full human consciousness and your own hands, bleeding with the shard, putting it back together in a way that has heart and meaning. And that's really what the human endeavor is, according to the story, and what Judaism is really meant to bring to the world. And that's why they have all their practices of kosher and so on. That's mindfulness.
600 different things, yeah.
Yeah. And not, trimming your sideburns and all kinds of things. Those are all mindfulness exercises to remind us of our job here is it's a higher unity. It's not just restoring the unity that's broken, it's creating a new unity. And part of that is restoring the sacred to its proper place. And that's, of course, you can say, well, everything is sacred, and it is. But some things, kind of evoke that more. There's, making bread, of course, that's very sacred and we need it to live. But we also need art to live a spiritual life. We need love. We need other things. But they see the world that we live in as broken and inadequate.
There's this much like the Buddha, that the first step is you have to recognize your suffering. Well, most people don't recognize they're miserable. So
So tikkun is the repair, the restoration, and that the weekly occasion to remember that. And the whole year is a cycle of um, this awareness of separation and restoration of unity. And that's why the Jewish New Year is all about repentance. It's not repenting to some God for forgiveness, but it's about reflecting really within yourself. And you are supposed to make overtures to anybody that you've hurt in the course of the last year or at any point in life. It's a special time where there's like a special opening to do this kind of restoration and make things right. I think we should have that. I wish every culture, every tradition had that, a time of year where you try to make amends for any failures or wrongdoing or missteps that you made in the previous year, to start off in a fresh foot, and do this work of repair. I think it's really significant that they see that as the human role. That's the job
mhm,
at hand.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. So now we're going to skip through a bunch of other alternative cosmologies from different parts of the planet. So let's go look at what the Hindus with the Vedic scripture have to say. So they describe the universe as eternal, but it undergoes endless cycles of creation and dissolution. So there isn't a singular beginning, there's many, many beginnings, many ends, again and again. I saw somewhere on the web, this has happened now 79 times, and we have 280 to go. I have no idea where those numbers come from. But the universe is it comes from a primordial source, and in the Hindu Vedic scriptures, it's a cosmic egg, which is the supreme being Brahman. And that evolves through stages involving different figures like Brahma, the creation, Vishnu, the preservation, and Shiva, the destruction. And then we start over again in the next cycle. So the exact origin of this remains a mystery. Even in the Rig Vedas, hymn of creation, this is not known, that the ultimate cause may really be unknown by humans.
Unknowable.
Unknowable. Yeah. So this is one example. Now let's look at the Native Americans. So Native Americans looked at nature all around them, and they had symbolism for seasons and weathers and plants and animals and on and on. And there was this principle of an all-embracing or universal, omniscient great spirit that connected everything in Earth, all of its landscapes, all the rocks, Earth itself. And this was therefore a belief in a parallel world in the sky that sometimes also goes underground or below the water and results in different, according to each tribe that you deal with, different creation narratives. You can go to the land of the dead or the memories of the ancient sacred ancestors that get involved. But many of these myths close the relationship between the human beings and animals, including birds and reptiles, and they feature shape-shifting between the animal and the human form. So you see an animal, it actually might be a human, or the human might switch back to an animal to fool you, and so forth. And marriage between people and different species, particularly bears, is a common theme in many of these stories, and the animals often foster human children. So the Hopi in particular have an origin myth that describes the world as being created through a series of worlds or caves from which the Hopis emerged, led by a spider woman and encountering Masa, the caretaker of Earth. So after emerging, the Hopi were given the sacred task of finding their center place by walking the earth and marking their journey with spiral insignia. So here you have an example here on this rock, this picture that's over here. You see this spiral here? This emphasizes their journey, and the myth emphasizes the Hopi's deep connection to the earth and their role as stewards of the land, a covenant they made with Masa upon their arrival to this, the fourth world. So there's been three previous worlds, and this is the fourth one, which they all believe is coming to an end.
Well, and part of that is that they didn't complete their journey. They decided to stop at some point before they had
Right.
made it all the way. So there's this idea of, again, human error and uh, imperfection.
No, that's a good point. Here's just a number of bullet points on all this. So we have the creator and Spider Woman. The creator creates this entity, and then Spider Woman, who's given the power to create life. And then they emerge from the underworld. The Hopi, along with other Pueblo people, believe they first lived in a series of worlds or caves beneath the earth. There's four worlds. There's a journey through these four worlds, the people eventually emerging from the last underground world into the current or fourth world. And the Earth's caretaker, upon emerging into the fourth world, the Hopi met this caretaker who instructed them to find their center place and to honor the Earth by taking care of it. The journey is a sacred journey. As they search for their center place, the Hopi clans place spiral markings as a record of their migration. And the myth concludes with the Hopi finding a bright light in the sky, which they took as a sign from the creator of the world that they had found their center place, leading them to settle in the southwest. So here are the Hopis. The Mayans took a different view. They began that the universe began with the cosmic void and that creation is cyclical, multiple attempts by the gods to create humanity. They dated the current cycle according to their long count, or they measured it in what they call baktuns, which are a certain number of days. They corresponds to August 11th, 3114 BC. I have no idea how they calculated that. The primary source for the Mayan creation story is the Popol Vuh, which was a sacred text that was discovered in the 16th century. But the Spaniards, burned so many of these things. Who knows what the real story was? Before creation, there was only a calm sea and an empty sky, and ruled by the creator deities, the god of the sky and the plumed serpent. And so, with the help of the heart of the sky, the gods spoke the word earth, which caused land to rise from the waters.
I love that the thing is the word in so
Yeah,
many traditions.
yeah. So they were seeking beings that could worship them. So the gods made several attempts to create humans. They first creations were animals, but these beings could not speak the names of their creators, and so they were condemned to be eaten. Then the gods fashioned humans from mud, but these creatures were weak and spoke nonsense, and they dissolved in the water just like mud. Then they made wooden people. And these beings could multiply, but lacked souls and intelligence. They failed to remember their creators. So a great flood came and destroyed them all. And the survivors of the flood were transformed into monkeys. Then we have the hero twins. This is a heroic period between the failed creations and the final successful one. These two twins, after overcoming all kinds of trials and defeating the lords of the underworld, they ascended to the sky to become the sun and the moon, providing light for the new world. And the final creation came from maize, or what we call corn, which evolved to today. In the last attempt, the gods successfully created humans from maize or corn, which is a key part of the Mayan identity. The first four men were initially too perfect. They possessed the knowledge of the gods, and fearing that they would become rivals, the gods clouded their vision, making them mortal. And so then the gods then created women to accompany the men, and together they populated the earth. The thing that's interesting is the Mayans appear to have simply disappeared by and large, and no one knows where they went. So there's clearly more to the story to be continued. Then we go to the Incas down in South America, and they have their own story. There was a supreme creator, Viracocha, who rose from the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is in South America, but it appears to have been an ocean seaport, and it's now at 10,000 feet above sea level in the Andes. So something happened somewhere to move this lake and everything that went with it up that high. But having said that, after the earth and sky were created after an initial age of darkness, Viracocha made a race of giants out of stone. But they displeased him, and so he destroyed them with a great flood. And after this destruction, the Incas understood the universe was cyclical, marked by creation, destruction, and recreation. And so it goes. The creation started from darkness. The world was a void of darkness, and Viracocha emerged from Lake Titicaca, created the earth and heavens. I already did this, sorry. My mistake. So then he created a new, smaller race of humans from clay or smaller stones, painted their clothes, gave them language, songs, seeds, and distinct appearances, and traveled among his creation, teaching people the arts of civilization, such as agriculture. And he left two assistants to continue awakening people from caves, springs, and other sacred places called huacas, which were venerated as entry points to the earth. After completing his work, Viracocha walked across Pacific Ocean, promising to return one day. And the Incas believed that he then became omnipresent and invisible, watching over the world. It's interesting that he walks across the water, that's how he does it. He doesn't fly through the air. Let's go to China. Here we have the myth of Pangu. There was a giant named Pangu who emerged from the cosmic age of chaos, who then separated the sky and the earth. And then he stood between the sky and the earth, and he pushed the sky up further every day for 18,000 years. And finally, he died, and his body parts transformed into various elements of the world. His breath became the wind, his blood the rivers, his left eye the sun, his right eye the moon, his body formed the soil, his hair the stars, and his body parasites became the first humans. So we have to go back to this. There was this beginning, there was only chaos, and out of this came a giant cosmic egg, and inside the egg lived Pangu, who slept for all these years, and during which the forces of yin and yang balanced within the egg. But then he woke and broke out of the egg with his axe, separating the lighter parts, the sky or yang, from the heavier parts, the earth or yin. And to prevent the sky and the earth from mixing again, Pangu stood between them and pushed the sky higher, holding it in place. And he did this for another 18,000 years, as we saw. And the period where the difference between heaven and earth increased significantly. And then finally, he was exhausted and died, and he went through the transformation we just described. So there's a totally different myth of how things started out. So the ideas here, the breath became the wind, the clouds and thunder, the eyes became the sun and the moon, the blood formed the rivers and oceans, the flesh became the fertile earth, the bones and teeth turned into rocks, precious metals and minerals, the hair and skin became vegetation, trees and plants, and the mites on his body, the parasites, became the first humans. So there you see our role. We're parasites. So what in the world did Ron come up with here? Well, Ron framed this as we have 12 spatial dimensions. Here we've shown them as 26 real dimensions, but there's 24 spatial dimensions, real spatial dimensions. And if we pair them up as complex numbers, real and imaginary part, the matter part and the dark matter part are the real and the imaginary part that we see of the world around us. And this leads to this order that we see around us that was created at the beginning, that there was this geometry. There's no notion here really of space itself. These are how the dimensions work out. But is there anything in these spaces? The answer is no. That's to be done. So it's going to be filled up with a foam which is called the ether, and that will be what we call the creation, the space all around us. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's all controlled. All of this stuff is controlled by information, and the information coats everything in all of the space compartments and all of the pieces of matter that make up this world here, and therefore it allows us to control everything, physics, chemistry, biology, for matter and for dark matter. Truly amazing. I get questions all the time. Would you please explain what a complex number is? So I'm putting in here, let's go back to high school or middle school algebra where we had a quadratic equation. If you have a quadratic equation, something that involves a square or something multiplied by itself, like x squared is x times x, then there's two roots to it, two solutions. When I substitute these roots in, I get 0. So let's take an example. X squared is 4. So that means x is plus 2 or x is minus 2. When I multiply plus 2 by itself, I get 4. When I multiply minus 2 by itself, I get 4. That's great. Now, that's all for real numbers. X is purely real here, positive 2 minus 2. Oh, let's just change it. X squared equals minus 4. Now we get a little different wrinkle. X is either plus 2 times the square root of minus 1, which is I, or minus 2, where I is again the square root of minus 1. So when I square this, x 2 squared is 4, and I squared is minus 1. So I get x squared is minus 4. And similarly, x squared of minus 2i is minus 4. So that checks. And then just to show you, these are like simple examples to get this across. If I simply took x squared plus 2x plus 5, then I'll find out that x is minus 5 plus or minus 3i, 3 times the square root of minus 1. So here's a mixture of a real and imaginary part. So a complex number here has two real numbers, a and b, but the imaginary part it has the real number b multiplied by the square root of minus 1. And that's critical in everything that goes on here. This appears to be the natural geometry that is used in the universe, not the real numbers, but these complex numbers. And this leads to the notion of we saw there actually were, if we go back to Ron's picture here, that we have 3 dimensions here for space, 1 for time, 3 dimensions here for space, 1 for time, and then 6, 6, and 6 compactified dimensions. So what in the world is a compactified dimension? Well, they're extra spatial dimensions. So here, if we took this extra space, think of this as, again, complex with a real and an imaginary part, and we wrap this around one of the axes that we see, like our x-axis going in and out, or going right and left, or going up and down. Wrapped around that axis is a curled up dimension. And there are, since we had uh, uh, 18 of them, and they're paired up in this way, there's 9 compactified dimensions out there that we have to deal with. And they're all wrapped around the X, Y, and Z axes that we see in the world around us. The other thing that showed up in the picture was what's called a manifold, that these extra dimensions, in fact, here's a picture. The mathematician Calabi postulated that these manifolds existed in 1954, and Yao showed in the late 1970s that they really did exist. No one, in math, you have to show it exists. You can't just say, oh, there's this manifold there. You know, how do you know? Does it exist? Is there anything here? So here's a picture over here of a 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold. Remember, we had 3 of these to make up what we think are the geometry of the universe, according to what Ron Cowan saw. But this is in 2 dimensions. So you got this picture here in 2 dimensions. So this is a projection. And this thing is evolving. You can go on the web and you'll see pictures of Calabi-Yau manifolds that evolve, that have holes, and they evolve and they spin around all over the place.
They make animations of
There's wonderful animations that you can look at. So now Marjorie pointed out here we have the tree of life out of the Kabbalah. And this has 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 nodes or Sephiroth here, and to make up the tree of life. But we just said we had 18 compactified dimensions. Well, that's true, but I left out we have 3 holes here, 4 holes here, and 8 holes here. And if we connect all the holes, we have 18 dimensions and 8 holes in total. We end up with really only 10 dimensions. So the tree of life by itself is mirroring these Calabi-Yau manifolds. That's what they saw. But each of these is fractal. Each of these, when you dig into it, is breaks down into a picture of itself. And anytime you look at any piece of the picture, it's the same picture. So that's what a fractal is. It continually reproduces itself at all dimensions.
Each sphere contains a whole tree,
Right,
in other words, and that's infinite.
right.
There's 10 within this one. And if you go in there through a space like this, there are 10 entire trees in there. And you go into each
Each of the
sphere,
10.
there's another 10.
And
And that
so,
goes on and on and on like this forever.
so this is
But
a
they
tip
see it
off.
as organized in 10. And there's all kinds of reasons to do with sacred geometry for why.
Right.
The tree of life comes out of the flower of life. I don't know if we have an image of that hand.
I didn't, we can get one, but I didn't. Yeah.
You know, this is all ancient, deep stuff that is actually um, evident in a lot of different cultures.
Yeah. So this shows what the mystics saw, probably through meditation.
Yeah,
So this takes us up to we skipped over time as a dimension and what time is doing in all of this. We talked about the start of the universe. Well, that's interesting. At the start of the universe, uh, there's a whole bunch of different, I'll just say, transitions that take place. For example, we talked about inflation, where space itself is expanding. So every time space expands, just one uh, basic unit, then that creates the possibility of a transition to a different timeline, to a different world line. And that creates the possibility for what in quantum mechanics is called the many worlds interpretation, many timelines. So all possible outcomes every time there's a transition occur. And you end up with all kinds of timelines here. So the start of the universe is by no stretch of the imagination something simple. It's very, very complicated. Which timeline are you on that's doing all this stuff? And why is there that one rather than any of the other ones? And we also touched on the fact that there were many universes. So each of the universes has their own set of timelines, and they're all running along doing their thing. And we end up with something that's incredibly complicated. But this appears to be what's really going on. We have these separate timelines. We have two evidences of this uh, for whatever it's worth. If you look on the web, you'll see the CIA carried out past life hypnotic regressions for tens of individuals, and a number of them saw the South winning the Civil War. So the timeline where the South won the Civil War apparently has now merged with the timeline we're in where the North won the Civil War. So it's not out of the question the South, in fact, did win the Civil War in 1862. It was poised to win, and that could have very well happened. But then that died out. It merged with this timeline. We have the prophecies of Nostradamus as a different example, where he saw three major players that influenced world history: Napoleon, Hitler, and the Antichrist. But Nostradamus wrote these prophecies saying he didn't like this and he wanted it to be avoided. And it appears that by the collective unconscious efforts of everyone in our timeline, that the Antichrist, in fact, has not happened. But Napoleon and Hitler in our timeline definitely did. And so it goes. So there's many different worlds out there running along and different timelines, which leads us up to what Ron saw, which was the really huge thing, that there wasn't a big bang at the start, there was a big bounce. And so when Ron went into deep meditation, he observed at the start that matter and dark matter was created, and he saw what are called Higgs bosons, one for matter and one for dark matter. Normally those are zero, but when they become non-zero, that controls the scaling of the amount of energy or mass associated with each particular particle that we're aware of. So once that happened, then we're really cooking with gas. That really is a moment of creation. And Ron also observed the inflation of space. These space compartments were, you could think of them as lattices that were kind of folded up, and they unfolded. They went kapong, kapong, kapong. They started to unfold 30 orders of magnitude. So inflation appears to be correct. But the main thing was there was no nuclear fireball. There was no explosion. There was simply the universe had collapsed on itself. All the space compartments collapsed, condensed, closed up, and then they bounced back and inflated as they did so. And this is really the huge thing that is going to change everything here. And we do have this one problem here, that there is this cosmic background radiation, which has been observed now. We saw Penzias and Wilson, 1963. These different satellites have been launched. Everyone agrees that there was some sort of residual background boom. So what in the world could have done this? Well, one possibility is that our universe, in fact, collided with another universe. Remember that when we have inflation occurring, there's many, many, many universes, trillions of universes, and it could very well be that 13.8 billion years ago, our universe might have collided with another universe. And we see from this James Webb telescope that when we go back 13.8 billion years and look what's there, we already see galaxies, not stars, but galaxies. And we see lots of black holes. So there's a lot of stuff that was already there 13.8 billion years ago, which suggests that our universe didn't start 13.8 billion years ago. It probably started trillions of years ago. But 13.8 billion years ago, it rammed into another galaxy, another universe. And that universe, when it hit our universe, created this bang that went through everywhere. It's a possibility to be tested by people like Ron. And there you have it. That's our class for tonight. So, Bruce, any comments? I didn't,
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, I'd just like to add um, uh, Ron's what Ron and I talked about. Um, like first of all, like
For the benefit of
all,
the class, let's just introduce.
Ron is your twin brother who's
yeah,
no
yeah,
longer
right,
with us.
yeah,
And
but he talked to Bart about a lot of things.
you're both
Okay, and basically,
practicing Buddhists.
yeah, he lives in a meditative world, and where he sees dimensions that go forever, like like the way most people perceive the world around them is nowhere near what's already there. So he, through meditation, he sees dimensions going forever. There's more and more dimensions, and he experiences as them as nonverbal. But one of the interesting things of his observations was that he was able to watch an electron every so often. It expands infinitively and then comes back to itself. So that means everything is doing that in the universe. So that means, in a sense, the universe is in union with itself. It's not separate from itself. And that's one part. And the other part is that in the meditative world, he sees reality in terms of dimensions. There's hundreds of dimensions of understanding everything around you. Now, one thing that happened with when my brother talked to Bart, Bart helped him channel the nonverbal understandings together so that could come up with some interesting understandings, like the understandings of subatomic particles and that sort of thing. But I'm just trying to give you
Yeah, I
different.
mean, for example, it could be that with these multiple timelines that are there, that he was seeing, these many dimensions, but in multiple timelines, which leads to hundreds of dimensions, that are all compactified.
Yeah, and
This is where words don't do the job. This is the problem. We're trying to
yeah.
describe something that we
Well,
really don't know.
I'm just trying to emphasize the world of meditation, where it takes you, which is what Ron's world was. So, yeah,
And he was able to go very deep very quickly,
that's right.
incredibly, incredibly deep. So, yeah,
That's right.
Well, and talk about how he would look at a button on a shirt. And
Yeah, right.
Go
Yeah.
down, 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 just
Right.
going down.
yeah. And
into-
other people would have done this, but they had no framework to interpret what they were seeing. They would see, like they would see the nucleus of an atom. What is that? I mean, that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, most people who are able to meditate the way he is able to are more focused on compassion and helping people transcend, well, basically what they call duality. Uh, that's a whole
But
other
he was,
thing. But the thing is that um, the world of meditation puts you into a different space altogether, and that's what he had.
Right. Yeah,
and he
the
was
true world,
also
the true reality.
he was
Yeah,
also
yeah,
a
yeah,
physics
yeah,
teacher,
yeah.
so he was seeing the world in terms of physics as a language or a model, right? A paradigm of all the structure, of all the
It gives you a vocabulary, but it's
right.
it's just a working vocabulary. The true concepts are yet to be determined.
Well,
But
yeah.
it's a model to talk about.
Right.
Well, yeah, but nonverbal understanding is very comprehensive. When you have a nonverbal understanding, it's very clear and vivid.
Right.
But putting it into concepts or to ordinary understanding is virtually impossible.
Right.
But that's normal. That when you live in
Yeah.
that kind of world, that's what it's like.
Sure. Sure.
But
That's
Bart,
that's
yeah,
why when you get into higher mathematics, the
yeah,
concepts are of that ilk. That
yeah, right,
what are you trying to describe or what's going on?
yeah,
That's why I love it when you add these images, because they at least give us something to kind of conceptualize it. That Calabi-Yau manifold. You see, like, well, what if we're expressing it in two-dimensional terms, which is hard to do, but you see these little envelopes, that go in and in and in, and you get these peaks of the dimensions within the dimensions.
yeah. I mean, one of the things about it is that these nonverbal understandings can be communicated telepathically,
Right.
because telepathy is not usually verbal. It's usually non-verbal understandings of a whole understanding, and you exchange that, and then if you need to, you can put it into language. But basically, concepts is not where it's at.
Right.
It's basically, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like a translation.
yeah. And it's one of the problems with modern science. They always get lost into theories rather than to really understanding what's actually really there, which is what the world of meditation gives.
And then they think that there's something wrong with the world when it isn't fitting into their
Well, and
diagrams.
the other problem is, as you said, it's mental, or it requires conscious intervention to achieve what's going on there. And that goes against what modern science. Modern science says, I have a camera, I have a ruler, I have, a way to measure this. What are you talking about? You're just using your mind to do this? Yes.
Well, the interesting thing is that people who do have that ability can talk to each other about it
Right. Telepathically.
telepathically. Yeah. Or
Right.
just the mind-to-mind understanding. It's
Right.
not all that uncommon, but in the Western world, that doesn't exist.
Right. In the
Yeah.
conventional Western world, right? There's still Western mystics, but
But you have people like Eddie Besant and
Charles Leadbeater.
Charles Leadbeater, apparently understanding who is that other guy, Babbitt.
Right.
And then
Those are just the ones that made the short list. There are undoubtedly tens of others that never wrote anything down that saw. God knows what they saw.
But then we have Ron having some kind of understanding from them.
Right.
And then this guy in England,
Phillips,
who
he was trying to cross-check or
Right.
validate were you really seeing what they saw? Were they really seeing what you saw?
And he had quite a background in Kabbalah, which is very in-depth all over this very elaborate website that he created. I think his background was in Western esoteric Kabbalah, which comes out of the Hebrew Kabbalah, but that's the more mystical,
Right.
experiential form of it.
Yeah.
They would say it's, it's better to just meditate in silence and feel it.
Yeah. But even in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, you see hints of this.
Right.
So, but Patanjali dismissed it. He said, "Look, it's more important to link with the oneness. These are just sideshows. These little tricks of looking into atoms and looking out into the far reaches of space. I mean, why not get down to really doing what matters and sense unconditional love?"
Right. Well,
So,
like just to give you an idea of the dimensions of understanding, like with my own teacher, Guru Namja Rinpoche, that's Ron's teacher as well, Namja Rinpoche. When I was going through my early unfoldment, the main conditioning that you have in your mind is from your family. Like when you were just a few months old, you start changing your world to get the love from your parents. So you take the universe is the world of your parents. You think they're like gods because they understand things that you have no idea about at all, right? So Namja Rinpoche on the inner, this is all inner meditation sort of thing, he could take me back to when I was 2 years old, and he could help me sort out what was my mind and what was my parents' mind. And that's how you transcend the conditioning from the parents.
right.
Like modern psychology doesn't even come close to that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of meditation, it's already there. You just see it directly. You understand it directly. And that's the kind of understanding that Ron had when he was looking at subatomic particles. It was just there.
Right.
Anyway, just another view of the universe.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
We'll go for next Tuesday, special end of the year class. Have a good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Tuesday.
Thank you.
Tuesday, right?
Tuesday. Next
Tuesday. 7 o'clock.
Tuesday at 7. Tuesday,
I have to put it in my calendar. Oh, okay.
Yep. Okay. Just one time. Okay.